In 1994, the World Bank asked me to make a film about poverty reduction in China. And I was introduced to the Luz Plateau in the upper and middle reaches of the Yellow River. I had the chance to then film a baseline study for the largest development program in the world, the Luz Plateau Watershed Rehabilitation Program. And I was able to compare the geopolitical events that I'd been covering for the news with the importance of ecology. And I found that ecology seemed to be a different order of magnitude and importance in comparison to the political and economic activities of a single group over a single generation. I began to consider time differently. I began to consider time as geologic time, evolutionary time, all of human history, and then my lifetime. And I began to be able to see how the effects of individuals and societies impact the future. In going to the Luz Plateau and seeing this enormous restoration program, I became extremely fascinated in what was going on with this, because the Luz Plateau is the cradle of Chinese civilization. But when I went there to visit it in the first time, it was completely ecologically destroyed. There was virtually no vegetation, and the hydrological cycle was completely disrupted. It was completely dry. And the people were poor and quite miserable. And then as I continued to follow the restoration of the plateau over years and then now decades, I saw a transformation in the landscape. The effort that people put into converting their slopes into terraces has resulted in a marked increase in agricultural productivity. The higher yields are directly related to the return of natural vegetation in the surrounding ecological land. I saw that human consciousness, understanding how the ecosystems function, made it possible to restore them, even if they'd been destroyed over vast areas and over long historic time periods. I came to understand that this is the central issue facing humanity, and that there are very specific things. Often we're talking about carbon sequestration, cap and trade, carbon trading, etc. And I started to realize that that's only half of the equation. The other half of the equation is that we're stimulating or encouraging the creation of oxygen through photosynthesis. And I realized the importance of oxygen in cooling the atmosphere and the surface of the earth. And I began to see that what was happening in the Luz Plateau was the recharging of the lower hydrological cycle. So what they did was they paid the people to redevelop the landscape.
In 1994, work began in earnest on one of the biggest land rehabilitation projects ever attempted. The hills were terraced to slow the flow of water, allowing it to soak into the soil.
The scale of this was just unbelievable. When you went out there and you saw that they were using just hand tools or simple machinery, and that they were doing this over vast areas. And of course, revegetation was a big part of it. The top had to be trees and had to be totally vegetated, totally reforested.
John has documented the results ever since.
I put my tripod here and looked out at these areas back in 1995.
The effort that people put into converting their slopes into terraces has resulted in a marked increase in agricultural productivity. The higher yields are directly related to the return of natural vegetation in the surrounding ecological land.
This is huge. This is the way forward.
In just a generation, the land has returned to health.
What I saw physically was that when you've removed the canopy and solar radiation directly hits the surface of the earth, the temperatures are massively elevated and the evaporation rates are increased. And when you increase the surface temperatures, you're creating thermic drafts, which push moisture into the upper atmosphere, where it is statistically twice as impactful as CO2. And when you restore the soil, organic layer, and the biomass, and restore the biodiversity and create a canopy, you're creating a microclimate below the canopy, where the temperatures are lowered and the moisture circulates in the lower atmosphere. So these memes that we've created about carbon sequestration or cap and trade or carbon trading, they're not very useful because they're abstracted. We need to talk about directly what's happening physically on the earth, because then we have a collective intelligence about what's happening, and we can affect it in our local areas, and collectively we can do this all over the world. And I saw in China's Loess Plateau that it's possible to rehabilitate large-scale damaged ecosystems, including ecosystems which have been degraded over long historic time periods and over very broad areas. This suggests that if this were the central intention of human civilization, we could restore all degraded lands on the earth. And that this is exactly what we need to do in order to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And I began to realize other implications from this, that not only are we destroying the ecology, but there is a reason why we're destroying the ecology. It's not magical. It's the effect of our actions that are degrading. And so physically, we're lowering the biodiversity, lowering the biomass, and lowering the accumulation of organic matter. And this is an exact reversal of the principles of evolutionary succession. So it makes no sense, actually, to do this, because it is the opposite of what natural systems have done. I started to think about the concepts of mechanical sequestration and so on. And I realized there is no possibility, zero possibility, that we could make enough machines and distribute them around the world to suck carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Because the embedded energy in the machines themselves, in the materials in the machines, and the fuel necessary to run these machines, that's an impossibility in the short period of time that we have to reach a planetary scale, and that we have another technology which not only can reach the scale, but has proven that it can generate, constantly filter, and continuously renew an oxygenated atmosphere on the Earth. That is photosynthesis. With 3.8 billion years of R&D, and with the proof that it's possible to do this at the scale we need to re-regulate the planet. All of the global conventions affecting climate change, the Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Convention on Combating Desertification, the Convention on Biological Diversity, all include an understanding that we can and must restore ecological function on a planetary scale. Then I began to look at the hierarchical structures. I was concerned that in order to make a project, it can take several years of money which are being spent to create these projects is quite high. Then they last for 2 or 3 years, and when the project stops and the money stops flowing, it just ends. I saw that there was another way to encourage direct community leadership and community action. I was having dreams. I dreamed that there were people who were waking up in the morning and they were going out to do ecosystem restoration, and they were very happy, and they were eating together and they were playing together, and they were effective, and it didn't take years to plan it. It was a decision, let's go camping. And you had the lowest cost and the highest direct impact. And everyone on Earth could participate. When I had this idea, I kind of rejected it. I thought, well, I don't think people are going to listen to me, and I didn't really believe it. But I wrote it in an essay, which was published. And when that essay was published, it was republished, and then it was circulated on the internet, and thousands and then tens of thousands of people began to discuss it. And they weren't saying, well, that's impossible. They were saying, yes, let's try that. That's a good idea. And so in the first year, we said, well, how would we do this? Would we do this in the same way that is happening around the world, where we go and beg for money from the existing capital funds? Or should we just share? And so we started to ask people who would be willing to share 10 euros to help this effort. And when 1,000 people pledged to share 10 euros per month, which would be 120 euros per year, then we created a foundation in Europe. And then when we started collecting that money, we had to create a first camp. So we created the first camp in Spain in the first year. In the second year, we created a camp in Mexico together with a partner, Via Organica, in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico. And then in the third year, there were 21 camps. In the fourth year, there were 37 camps, and at the end of this year, there will be more than 50 camps. This can grow exponentially and rapidly, this is the way to engage very large numbers of people directly in mitigation and adaptation to climate change. It's also the answer to full employment, food security, the refugee problems, engaging the homeless and the hungry, and those who are failing in the economy. And this made me think about human economy. And I realized that what's going on in the existing economy has a flaw in logic. That essentially the economy is incentivizing degradation of the earth. And how is that possible? It's doing that because it's valuing things higher than ecological function. And when you value things higher than ecological function, you create a perverse incentive to degrade the Earth's systems. If we understand that ecological function is more valuable than things, then ecological function must become the basis of human economy. If ecological function is the basis of a human economy, it becomes impossible to degrade or pollute. And all human effort goes to restore ecological function on a planetary scale. It's the lowest cost methodology for directly addressing climate change, and it's the most effective way, and that everyone has a role to play. And in doing that, it's possible to get back human rights. It's possible to stand up and demand that all people and all living beings are created equal. And it's possible to effectively lower surface temperatures and hold moisture in the lower hydrological cycle. And it's possible to return fertility to soils which have been massively degraded and have no life. And it's possible to protect the existing biodiversity and encourage the return of enormous biodiversity all over the world. This can be done in cities. We're seeing this happen in cities around the world. So it's basically a design issue. And the best case is community-based, because each of the communities, it's in their own self-interest. It's possible for them, everyone, to understand it. So you don't need to have a vertical hierarchy, you have a horizontal hierarchy in which everyone is equal. And then, if we value ecological function higher than things, we can transform our economy to one which can constantly grow. And in growing, renews the hydrological cycle, reduces the risk of extreme weather, makes it possible for everyone to be fully employed with meaningful work, not making something that's unnecessary and buying and selling things and psychologically not loving what they do. This is essentially what I would like to discuss, and I look forward to having this discussion with you, not only today, but for the rest of our lives. And future generations are going to have to carry on this work. But this gives us a pathway which leads to restoring ecological function on a planetary scale, mitigating and adapting to human-induced climate changes, to restoring biodiversity, the hydrological cycles, soil fertility, and maintaining a harmonious balance with Earth systems. Thank you very much.
The effort that people put into converting their slopes into terraces has resulted in a marked increase in agricultural productivity. The higher yields are directly related to the return of natural vegetation in the surrounding ecological land.